So your father died at the prep table on a Tuesday in a Detroit suburb, and on Friday, a letter arrived from the state of Michigan. It said the funeral home he ran for 41 years no longer has a license to operate. You are 44 years old. You live in Chicago. You are a hospital administrator. You have 30 days to decide what to do with a black mourning wreath still hanging on the front door, 2 pre-need contracts maturing this month, and a building that is somehow both worth $4 million and worth nothing. The funeral home you inherited was almost certainly not built as one. It was built between 1875 and 1925 as a private residence for a merchant or a mill owner or a country doctor, a Queen Anne or an Italianate, 3 stories with a wraparound porch, a corner turret under a slate or pressed metal roof, and a porte-cochere on the side for what used to be a carriage and is now, discreetly, a hearse.
Somewhere between 1905 and 1945, an undertaker bought the house from the original family. He poured a concrete floor in the basement and ran a drain to the municipal sewer. He converted the double parlor on the ground floor into a chapel. He moved his own family into the bedrooms upstairs, above the chapel, above the prep room, in the same building where he worked.
According to the National Funeral Directors Association, roughly 19,000 funeral homes operate in the United States today, and approximately 80% of them are still privately held. Most are the same Victorian house, converted between the world wars, with the family quarters still on the second floor. And on most of those front doors, there is still a black crepe ribbon tied to the door knocker, 3 weeks after the funeral, not yet taken down because no one in the family has been back to the house. The funeral home is 3 businesses wearing 1 trench coat. It is a state-licensed service trade governed by a board of embalmers in the capital. It is a piece of Victorian commercial real estate sitting on a half-acre lot with a 50-year-old roof. And it is a shadow bank holding decades of prepaid funeral contracts in a trust account the heir has probably not yet opened. Start with the revenue. In the 1970s, almost every American funeral was a traditional service, with embalming, a viewing, a casket, and a burial. NFDA's 2023 median price for that service is roughly $8,300, before the cemetery, the vault, or the monument. The cremation version, with the full service and viewing, runs about $6,280. A direct cremation, no ceremony, no embalming, no chapel, runs around $2,200. In 2025, NFDA reported the U.S. cremation rate at 63.4%. It is projected to reach 82.3% by 2045. The math is mechanical. A 113-case independent funeral home grosses roughly $886,000 a year at full traditional pricing. The same 113 bodies at 80% cremation, with most of it direct, gross about $300,000. Same building, same families. A 66% revenue collapse. On the page, it is a business. In the basement, it is a regulated chemical plant. The Occupational Safety and Health Administration's formaldehyde standard, 29 CFR 1910.1048, sets the 8-hour exposure limit at 0.75 parts per million and the short-term limit at 2. The prep room needs engineering ventilation, air monitoring at $1,500 to $4,000 a year, medical surveillance on the embalmer, and a written hazard communication program. The deceased owner did all of this for free. He was the licensed funeral director. He was the embalmer. He was the manager who lived within 75 miles of the establishment because Michigan law requires it. The day he died at the prep table, every one of those line items became a hiring problem. A licensed funeral director hired as a full-time manager in 2025
commands $75,000 to $120,000 in base salary, plus benefits, in a labor market with a documented mortuary staffing shortage. Then the capital list. A walk-in refrigeration unit, if the building doesn't already have one, runs $15,000 to $30,000. A hearse, new, runs $90,000 to $140,000. A new retort, the cremation chamber itself, runs $150,000 to $300,000. Without one, the home is a price taker to a standalone crematory at $250,000 to $450 per case. That cost lands directly on the already compressed cremation margin.
And then, in a filing cabinet in the office that used to belong to the deceased, the heir opens the preneed folder. A preneed contract is a funeral paid for in advance. The customer hands over money, sometimes decades early, and the funeral home holds it in a state-regulated trust against the day the service is performed. A 350-call home routinely holds $1 to $5 million in those obligations. The trust earns roughly 3% a year. Caskets, labor, embalming chemicals, and the building have inflated faster than that for 20 years. So the liability, the face value of a funeral promised in 2003, sits stubbornly above the asset, the trust balance that should be paying for it. On a $9 million pre-need book, a 5-point underfunding gap, common after 2 decades of that arithmetic, is roughly $450,000 of personal exposure on the heir's balance sheet. Meet James Wiesner. He ran the Winklepleck Wiesner Funeral Home in Brownstown, Indiana, a small town south of Indianapolis. Over years, he accepted prepaid funeral funds from his neighbors. He did not establish the trust accounts the state of Indiana required him to establish. He kept the money. In 2020, he pleaded guilty to stealing roughly $200,000 from 20 victims. The heir of a Wiesner-style operator does not inherit a shortfall. The heir inherits a crime scene. 20 families holding contracts the trust cannot honor. A state board with a file open. A criminal matter that may or may not have closed before the funeral. The pre-need obligations survive the dead owner and become, in some configurations of state law and corporate structure, a personal liability of the estate. The more common failure is quieter. Consider the Fitzgerald Funeral Home in Rockford, Illinois, founded in 1914 by Frank R. Fitzgerald, run for 110 years across 4 generations of the family. The next generation operator was Patrick Fitzgerald, the great-grandson, who joined as vice president in 2009. He was the succession plan. In 2019, the Illinois Department of Financial and Professional Regulation suspended Patrick Fitzgerald's funeral director and embalmer license indefinitely for incompetence in funeral practice, unprofessional conduct, and willfully filing false records. A $2,500 fine, and the succession path ended. 5 years later, on December 9, 2024, the family sold the 110-year firm to Park Lawn Corporation. The next generation existed. The license disqualification destroyed it. So the heir, sitting in the office, eventually reaches the 4 real paths. The first is to hire a licensed manager, pay $75,000 to $120,000 a year, absorb the cremation-driven margin compression, and run the business at the volume it has. The second is to sell the going concern to a national consolidator. Carriage Services bought Fairfax Memorial in Virginia for $100 million in 2019. Service Corporation International absorbed Shodner in Columbus, Ohio in 2022, a 6th-generation institution that had operated since 1855. The third path is to sell to local employees who have worked at the home for a decade or more, usually at a 30 to 40% discount to the consolidator's price. Sold to a consolidator, the family ends. Kept in the family, the margin ends.
The fourth path is to close the business and convert the building.
Pratt Funeral Home in Jacksonville, Florida, closed in 2019. The 1916 mortuary sold for roughly $650,000 in 2021, and Silver Street Management poured $4 million into adaptive reuse, a 13-unit apart hotel called the Raven, with former caskets repurposed as kitchen islands and the old casket lift retained. Bolton and Lunsford in Cincinnati closed in early 2020 and transferred in 2022 for $317,000. The planned twin restaurant conversions stalled and never broke ground.
The license costs 4 years of apprenticeship and mortuary science school to earn. The 30-day clock starts the morning of the funeral. In Pennsylvania, the State Board of Funeral Directors gives 10 days to notify, 30 days to file the estate license application. In Michigan, change of ownership automatically cancels the establishment license. In New York, the estate may operate for 28 months with a registered manager, the longest window in the country. Most heirs do not know which state's clock they are inside.
A brownstone in Brooklyn, a family farm in Iowa, a vacation compound on a Maine lake. These heritage assets let the heir defer. The roof can wait. The fields can lie fallow. The boat can sit on its blocks for another year while the executor decides. A funeral home cannot. The license, the OSHA-regulated physical plant, the pre-need obligations to families who are waiting. Together, they make the inheritance an active commitment, not a passive bequest. The statute requires the choice within 30 days because the statute knows the families are waiting. A funeral home cannot be inherited by deed alone. It can only be inherited by someone willing to keep operating it.